Florida nights are hot, heavy, and often full of secrets. But one rapper's late-night visit would end not with music, but with murder. A married father of two, a rising voice in Florida's underground rap scene, thought he was sneaking off for a quick affair. Instead, he walked into a trap that would cost him his life. Shot dead outside a quiet suburban house in the early hours of the morning, his murder unraveled a story of jealousy, betrayal, and double lives. What really happened that night? Who pulled the trigger? And why was a 20-year-old girl at the center of it all? This is the story of a Florida rapper, a forbidden affair, and the fatal bullet that silenced his voice forever. If you enjoy chilling investigations and true crime storytelling, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Minds Archives. New cases are unlocked every week. The rapper, known locally by his stage name but more privately as Marcus Hill, was building a name for himself in the independent hip-hop scene. He was 28 years old, ambitious, and by all appearances, happily married with a young family. But behind closed doors, Marcus lived a different life. Like many chasing fame, he was drawn to the attention, the parties, and the women, and one woman in particular would change the course of his life. Her name was Tiana Roberts, just 20 years old. Young, vibrant, and reckless. Tiana was already tangled in her own troubled relationship with her boyfriend, a man with a violent temper and a reputation in the neighborhood. What began as flirty Instagram messages between Marcus and Tiana escalated into secret meetings. Soon it wasn't just a fling, it was an affair. But the danger of that affair wasn't just in the betrayal of Marcus's wife. It was in where those meetings were taking place. Because Marcus wasn't meeting Tiana at hotels or secluded hideaways. He was meeting her at her boyfriend's house. It was just after 2 a.m. on a humid summer night when Marcus pulled his car into the driveway of the small Florida home where Tiana was staying. His wife thought he was in the studio working late. Instead, Marcus was about to enter the most dangerous chapter of his life. What Marcus didn't know was that he was being watched. Neighbors later recalled seeing shadows lurking near the house that night, movement that didn't match the quiet suburban street. Inside, Tiana whispered on the phone, urging Marcus to come in quietly. The boyfriend wasn't supposed to be there, but in reality, he was. Only minutes later, gunshots ripped through the silence of the night. Marcus collapsed on the pavement outside the front door, bleeding heavily. A car screeched away into the distance. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. The rapper who had hoped to make it big in music was dead on the spot. At first glance, it looked like a burglary gone wrong, or maybe a random drive-by, but investigators quickly pieced together that this was personal. Marcus wasn't robbed. His jewelry, wallet, and phone were still on him. The motive, detectives realized, wasn't money. It was betrayal. But who had fired the fatal shots? Was it Tiana's jealous boyfriend? A rival rapper? Or someone else entirely? Perhaps even connected to Marcus's own wife once she discovered the affair. The truth was tangled, and uncovering it would take investigators deep into the hidden world of a rapper's double life. Marcus Hill wasn't a household name yet, but in his city, people knew who he was. He grew up in the tougher parts of Jacksonville, Florida, where music wasn't just a dream, it was a way out. By 14, Marcus was already scribbling rhymes in his school notebooks, trying to imitate the rappers he idolized. Life wasn't easy. His father was absent, his mother worked 2 jobs, and Marcus spent most of his teenage years drifting between trouble and ambition. He wasn't a gangster by nature, but he was surrounded by that world. Friends caught up in fights, drugs, and prison sentences. Marcus swore to himself he would make it out differently, and for a while it seemed like he would. By his early 20s, Marcus had developed a raw, gritty style of rap. His songs touched on street struggles, loyalty, betrayal, and dreams of escaping poverty. He gained a loyal local following, performing at clubs, backyard shows, and open mics. To his fans, he wasn't just another aspiring rapper. He was one of them, someone whose words carried the weight of lived experience. Behind the microphone, Marcus was a family man. He had married his high school sweetheart, Alicia, when he was just 22. Together, they had 2 young children, a daughter aged 5 and a baby boy who had just turned 2. Alicia was supportive, the kind of partner who posted his flyers online, managed his small merchandise sales, and told him he was destined for more. Friends say she often bragged, "My man's gonna blow up, just watch." To neighbors and relatives, they looked like a picture-perfect family. But Marcus carried a restless hunger, a need for excitement that wasn't always satisfied by music or marriage. That hunger, combined with his rising popularity, made him vulnerable to temptation. Tiana Roberts was the opposite of Alicia in nearly every way. At just 20 years old, she was still trying to find her footing in life. She had dropped out of community college and bounced between part-time jobs, always posting glamorous selfies on Instagram that suggested a lifestyle she didn't actually have. Where Alicia was stable and grounded, Tiana was reckless and impulsive. She loved attention, fast thrills, and the kind of drama that most people would avoid. The connection between Marcus and Tiana started in the most modern way possible: social media. Tiana had commented fire emojis under one of Marcus's freestyle videos on Instagram. Marcus noticed. He sent her a direct message. What began as light conversation turned into flirtation, then into late-night phone calls. Marcus, flattered by the attention of a younger fan, couldn't resist. Soon he was sneaking out late, telling his wife he was at the studio, when in reality, he was meeting Tiana. The affair could have stayed hidden, just another secret in the messy private life of a rising rapper. But there was a problem. Tiana wasn't single. She was in a relationship with a man named Derek Coleman, a 23-year-old who had a short fuse and a bad reputation. Derek was known in the neighborhood for his temper. He had been in fights, arrested once for assault, and was the kind of person who demanded respect wherever he went. Everyone knew Derek was possessive when it came to Tiana. Friends say he was jealous to the point of obsession, checking her phone, questioning her whereabouts, even showing up at her job unexpectedly. And yet, somehow, Marcus and Tiana decided to conduct their affair right under Derek's nose, sometimes literally at his house when Derek was supposedly away. It was a reckless choice, almost guaranteed to end badly. And it did. By early summer, whispers about the affair began circulating in Marcus's circle. One friend recalled warning him, "Bro, you're playing with fire. That dude Derek don't play. He finds out, it's over." But Marcus brushed it off. He was convinced Derek wasn't smart enough, or too distracted to piece things together. Plus, Marcus thought Tiana would cover for him if anything happened. What Marcus didn't realize was that Derek was already suspicious. Neighbors recalled seeing Marcus's car parked outside the house at odd hours. One even mentioned catching glimpses of him slipping inside when the lights were low. Derek may not have had concrete proof yet, but he had enough reason to suspect betrayal. And with his temper, suspicion was dangerous enough. In the final week before the shooting, Marcus seemed restless. Friends said he looked distracted in the studio, checking his phone constantly, stepping outside for whispered conversations. At home, Alicia reportedly noticed the distance too. She later told investigators she felt something was off, but Marcus brushed off her questions, claiming the stress of music and bills was wearing him down. Meanwhile, Tiana was playing a dangerous game. Some nights she reassured Marcus that Derek would never find out. Other nights she hinted that Derek was becoming suspicious and paranoid. One chilling text message from Marcus to a friend, later retrieved by detectives, read, "If something happens, just know I was trying to make moves. I can't let her go. She's got me wrapped up." That message would later feel like a grim foreshadowing of what was to come. The night of the shooting didn't come out of nowhere. It was the collision of weeks of lies, temptations, and jealousy. Marcus thought he was slipping into another secret rendezvous with Tiana, the kind he had done many times before. He didn't realize that this time, someone was waiting. What unfolded in the early hours of that morning would shock his family, his fans, and an entire community. The married rapper chasing fame, the young woman caught between two men, and the jealous boyfriend with a gun. It was a triangle that could only end one way, with blood on the pavement. It was Saturday, July 17th, a typical summer night in Florida. The air was thick, humid, and heavy. The kind of night where the streets stay alive long after midnight. For Marcus Hill, the night began in familiar territory, the studio. Friends who were there that evening described him as antsy, chain-smoking outside between takes, his phone lighting up every few minutes with text notifications. Around 11:30 p.m., Marcus received one message that changed his entire mood. He didn't show it to anyone, but his expression shifted. By midnight, he was packing up, telling the guys he was heading out. One friend remembered joking, "Don't get into trouble, bro." Marcus laughed it off, but everyone knew he had secrets. By 1:45 a.m., Marcus was behind the wheel of his black Dodge Charger, speeding down the near-empty streets. Traffic lights glowed red against the damp pavement, street lights flickered, and music pulsed from his speakers. His destination: a modest one-story home in a quiet residential neighborhood where Tiana was waiting. Phone records later confirmed a series of calls and texts exchanged between Marcus and Tiana during that drive. Investigators would piece together the messages. Tiana asking him to come over, Marcus hesitating, Tiana insisting it was safe. But was it really? Inside the house, Tiana was pacing. Some say she looked nervous that night, like she knew something was about to happen. Later testimony would reveal that Derek, her boyfriend, had been acting strangely all day. Quiet, brooding, checking his phone obsessively. Around midnight, Derek left the house in his car. Tiana thought she finally had the green light to see Marcus without confrontation. That's when she sent the message. "Come through, he's gone." But here's the chilling part. Derek hadn't gone far. Some believe he already knew what was happening and was circling back, waiting for proof. At 2:07 a.m., Marcus pulled into the driveway. His Charger rolled to a stop just a few feet from the front door. Surveillance footage from a nearby neighbor's security camera later captured the car arriving, its headlights briefly illuminating the front yard. Marcus stepped out, hoodie pulled low, trying to move quietly. He wasn't a stranger here. He had slipped in before, but this night the air felt heavier. As he approached the door, he pulled out his phone. A final text was sent to Tiana. "Here." According to eyewitness testimony and later ballistics reports, it all happened in less than a minute. As Marcus reached the steps leading to the door, gunfire erupted. Multiple shots rang out, shattering the silence of the sleeping neighborhood. Neighbors later described waking to the sound of pops and a man screaming. One woman who peeked through her blinds said she saw a figure collapse in the driveway and another shadow darting away into the darkness. Marcus was hit twice, once in the chest, once in the abdomen. He staggered backward, clutching his torso, before collapsing onto the concrete. Blood pooled beneath him. A black sedan was seen speeding away moments later. "Inside," Tiana screamed. According to her later statements, she froze in shock when she heard the gunshots. She rushed to the door and found Marcus lying outside, struggling to breathe. Panicked, she dialed 911. Her voice on the call was frantic, nearly unintelligible. "He's been shot. Oh my God, he's bleeding everywhere. Please, hurry." Dispatchers instructed her to apply pressure to the wounds. But by the time paramedics arrived minutes later, Marcus was already unresponsive. At 2:19 a.m., Marcus Hill was pronounced dead. Police swarmed the scene within half an hour. Flashing lights lit up the small street, yellow tape cordoned off the driveway, and detectives began questioning shaken neighbors. One detail immediately stood out. Marcus still had his jewelry, phone, and wallet. This was no robbery. This was personal. Detectives also noted the unusual circumstance. Marcus, a married man, was shot dead outside the home of a 20-year-old woman who was already in a relationship. The pieces of the puzzle were already forming. Investigators canvassed the area, gathering witness accounts. Several neighbors reported seeing Marcus's Charger pull into the driveway. Two claimed that they saw another vehicle, a black sedan, parked a few houses down earlier in the night. One particularly telling statement came from a neighbor across the street. "I saw a man standing in the shadows near the fence about 15 minutes before the shots. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think much of it until I heard the gunfire." That man in the shadows was never formally identified, but many suspected it was Derek Coleman. When detectives sat down with Tiana at the station later that morning, she initially played innocent. She described Marcus as just a friend and insisted Derek had nothing to do with it. But detectives weren't convinced. They knew Marcus had been lured there that night, and they knew jealousy was the strongest motive of all. And Derek? He wasn't answering his phone. By dawn, he was officially considered a person of interest. News of the killing spread fast. By sunrise, social media was buzzing with shock and speculation. Local rap fans flooded timelines with RI posts, while rumors of the affair exploded. For Marcus's wife, Alicia, the nightmare had only just begun. She was woken by a knock on the door and the devastating news that her husband was gone. But worse than the loss was the unfolding reality. The world was about to discover his secret life. She didn't just lose her husband, she lost the image of the man she thought she knew. By the end of the first 24 hours, police had narrowed their theory. Marcus was the victim, lured into danger by his affair. Tiana was the link between him and the shooter. Derek had the motive, the temper, and the likely opportunity. But proving it wouldn't be easy. The only clear evidence was Marcus's body, the bullet casings, and the whispers of a love triangle turned deadly. What police needed now was hard proof, and that proof would come from phone records, digital footprints, and a few critical mistakes made in the heat of jealousy. By the morning after the murder, the crime scene had been combed over by detectives. Yellow markers dotted the driveway where shell casings lay, glinting in the early sunlight. Bloodstains had already been washed away by paramedics, but the tragedy hung heavy in the air. Detectives knew one thing for certain. This was not random. The shooter hadn't taken Marcus's chain, phone, or wallet. The shots were fired at close range, precise, almost deliberate. This wasn't a robbery. It was personal retribution. And the prime suspect, the jealous boyfriend, Derek Coleman. Tiana was brought in for questioning just hours after the shooting. Detectives described her as visibly shaken, though some suspected her tears were as much about fear of Derek as they were about Marcus. At first, she downplayed everything. She called Marcus a close friend, denying any romantic involvement. But detectives weren't buying it. They confronted her with Marcus's phone, recovered from the scene, full of text messages and call logs between the two of them. The messages left no doubt. They weren't just friends. They had been involved for weeks, maybe months. Cornered, Tiana admitted to the affair. She claimed Derek had been controlling, jealous, and prone to outbursts. She swore she hadn't told him about Marcus, insisting she thought Derek was gone for the night. But the detectives pressed harder. Then why was Derek's car spotted in the neighborhood around the same time Marcus was shot? Tiana froze. She had no answer. Meanwhile, a separate team was trying to locate Derek. His phone was going straight to voicemail, and he wasn't at home. Friends claimed that they hadn't seen him since the night before. Detectives ran his vehicle through traffic cameras and got a hit. Around 1:58 a.m., just minutes before the shooting, Derek's black sedan was captured turning onto the very street where Tiana lived. That was the first hard piece of evidence placing him at the scene. Ballistics experts examined the shell casings recovered from the driveway. They matched a 9mm handgun, a common firearm, but detectives were confident Derek had access to one. He had previously been spotted at a local gun range, and acquaintances later confirmed he always carried. The trajectory of the bullets also told a chilling story. Marcus had been shot while facing the front door. The shooter had fired from the side yard, using the shadows of the fence line for cover. It wasn't a wild shootout, it was an ambush. This suggested premeditation. Someone had been waiting for Marcus to arrive. Over the next 48 hours, detectives kept circling back to Tiana. Her story had too many holes. Why had she invited Marcus over that night, knowing Derek had been acting suspicious all day? Why had she assured Marcus it was safe? Some investigators theorized she may have unknowingly set Marcus up, manipulated by Derek to lure him into a trap. Others wondered if she knew exactly what was coming. In one tense moment during her second interview, a detective leaned forward and asked bluntly, "Tiana, did you know Derek was waiting outside?" Tiana broke down crying. She never admitted to knowing for certain, but her silence spoke volumes. Phones often tell the truth, people won't. Detectives subpoenaed Derek's cell phone records. The data revealed damning evidence. His phone pinged a tower less than a mile from the crime scene at 2:05 a.m., the exact time of the shooting. He had texted Tiana earlier that evening. "I know you're lying. Don't play me." Moments before Marcus arrived, Derek had sent another text that was later deleted. "I'll see for myself." The most chilling discovery was a Google search made on Derek's phone earlier that week. How to catch someone cheating on you. The pieces were falling into place. 3 days after the murder, Derek finally resurfaced. He walked into the station flanked by a lawyer, insisting he had nothing to do with the shooting. He claimed he had been driving around to clear his head that night and denied ever confronting Marcus. Detectives confronted him with the evidence: the camera footage of his car, the phone records, the text messages. Derek remained stone-faced, repeating the same line, "You can't prove I was there when it happened." It was true. They didn't have the gun, nor direct eyewitness identification. But circumstantial evidence was mounting. While detectives worked the case, Marcus's widow, Alicia, was living her own nightmare. Not only was she grieving the sudden violent death of her husband, but she was blindsided by the revelation of his affair. Family members recalled her being torn between sorrow and rage. In one emotional interview with detectives, she admitted, "I don't even know who he was anymore. He told me he was working, and he died in another woman's driveway." The community rallied around her, but whispers about Marcus's double life complicated the public's perception of him. For detectives, though, the focus stayed on the killer. The break investigators needed came from an unexpected source: a neighbor's home security camera. Though grainy, the footage captured a dark figure slipping through the side yard just minutes before the gunfire. The figure's build, height, and gait all matched Derek Coleman. Combined with the ballistics, the phone records, and the vehicle sighting, detectives felt confident they had enough to bring charges. On July 23rd, less than a week after the murder, Derek Coleman was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. During the arrest, police searched Derek's vehicle. Inside the trunk, they found a pair of gloves and a dark hoodie. More importantly, they found a box of 9mm ammunition. Though the gun itself was never recovered, the ammo matched the caliber of the casings from the crime scene. It wasn't the smoking gun detectives had hoped for, but it was enough to bolster their case. With Derek behind bars, the case shifted gears. Prosecutors prepared for what promised to be a high-profile trial. They had the narrative: a jealous boyfriend lying in wait, a forbidden affair, and a fatal ambush. But Derek's defense team had their own strategy. They argued the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. No murder weapon, no eyewitness placing Derek's face at the scene. They suggested someone else, perhaps a rival of Marcus in the rap scene, could have pulled the trigger. The stage was set for a courtroom battle where every detail of that night and every secret of Marcus's life would be exposed. The trial of State of Florida versus Derek Coleman began nearly a year after the murder. By then, the story had already made headlines across Florida: married rapper shot in love triangle. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Camera crews angled for shots of Marcus's grieving widow, Alicia, walking into the courtroom holding her children's hands. On the other side, Derek's family insisted he was being railroaded by the system, framed by circumstantial evidence. Inside, the tension was suffocating. This wasn't just about a murder. It was about betrayal, infidelity, and jealousy, all playing out in the public eye. Prosecutors painted Derek as a man consumed by rage, a boyfriend who couldn't handle the humiliation of being cheated on. They presented their timeline. Derek left the house late that night, texting Tiana angrily. His car was captured near the neighborhood minutes before the shooting. His phone pinged nearby towers at the exact time Marcus was gunned down. He fled, discarded the weapon, and went into hiding for days before surrendering. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor declared in opening statements, "this was no random act of violence. This was an ambush fueled by jealousy and rage, carried out by a man who could not stand being betrayed." Ballistics experts testified about the 9mm shell casings. A crime scene analyst explained how the shooter had waited in the shadows, suggesting planning rather than impulse. And then came the star witness, Tiana Roberts. When Tiana took the stand, the courtroom leaned forward. She was the woman at the center of it all, the lover of Marcus, the girlfriend of Derek, and the last person to see Marcus alive. Her testimony was emotional. She admitted under oath that she and Marcus had been having an affair for months. She claimed Derek's jealousy had been escalating, and that she believed he was following her in the days before the murder. On the night of the shooting, she said, Derek had stormed out after an argument, and she assumed he was gone. She admitted inviting Marcus over, only to hear gunfire minutes later. When asked if she believed Derek was the shooter, Tiana hesitated, then nodded through tears. Yes, I believe it was him. Who else would do that? The defense immediately pounced, arguing Tiana's testimony was biased and self-serving, meant to protect herself from suspicion. Still, the image of her crying on the stand left an impression on the jury. Next came Alicia Hill, Marcus's widow. Her testimony was perhaps the most gut-wrenching of the trial. Through tears, she spoke about the night she received the news, the horror of explaining to her young daughter that Daddy wasn't coming home. But the defense cross-examined her carefully, highlighting Marcus's affair. They suggested Marcus's double life may have created enemies beyond Derek. A rival rapper, a disgruntled fan, even someone in Marcus's own circle. They hinted anyone could have been responsible. For Alicia, the questioning was brutal. Not only was she mourning her husband, but she was forced to publicly confront his betrayal. Derek's lawyers hammered away at the prosecution's lack of physical evidence. No gun, no fingerprints, no eyewitness who can say they saw Derek pull the trigger, they repeated again and again. They argued that while Derek had motive wasn't proof. They suggested the possibility of a drive-by shooting by someone in Marcus's rap circle. They pointed to online feuds Marcus had with other aspiring artists, arguing that jealousy in the music industry was just as powerful as jealousy in love. They also emphasized the unreliability of Tiana's testimony, painting her as manipulative, untrustworthy, and possibly complicit. She was juggling two men, the defense attorney said. Is it not possible she lured Marcus into danger for her own reasons? It was a bold strategy, casting doubt without offering an alternative suspect. But in a courtroom, sometimes doubt is all you need. In a risky move, the defense put Derek on the stand. Calm and composed, he denied everything. I didn't shoot Marcus, he said firmly. I was upset that night, sure, but I just drove around. I didn't go back there. Prosecutors confronted him with the damning phone data and camera footage. Derek stuck to his story, claiming the cell tower pings were inaccurate and the black car seen on footage could have been anyone's. But under pressure, cracks began to show. When asked why he went into hiding for 3 days after the murder, Derek stammered, I was scared they'd blame me for something I didn't do. For some jurors, that sounded less like innocence and more like guilt. In closing, the prosecution reminded the jury of the simple, human motive, jealousy. Marcus Hill didn't die because of money or robbery or gang violence. He died because this man, pointing to Derek, couldn't stand the idea of another man with his girlfriend. That's all it takes sometimes. Jealousy is enough to kill. The defense countered with a plea for reasonable doubt. You cannot convict a man of murder on assumptions. The state wants you to believe Derek was there, but belief is not proof. They want you to ignore every other possibility, to ignore the lack of a weapon, to ignore the unreliability of witnesses. Don't let emotion replace evidence. The courtroom fell silent as the jury left to deliberate. For 2 full days, the jury deliberated. Tension mounted as reporters camped outside, waiting for the outcome. Inside, Alicia clutched her children, while Tiana sat trembling, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Derek remained stoic, but his hands shook slightly whenever he adjusted his tie. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood holding the verdict slip. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty, gasps echoed through the courtroom. Alicia burst into tears, holding her children tight. Tiana sobbed silently. Derek closed his eyes and shook his head, muttering, "This ain't right." The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. With the verdict, the case was closed, but the scars remained. Alicia was left to raise her children alone, haunted by the betrayal that led to her husband's death. Tiana vanished from the public eye, blamed by many for luring Marcus into danger. Derek's family insisted he was innocent, swearing he'd been unfairly targeted. And Marcus? His music lived on in mixtapes and online streams, his fans keeping his voice alive. But for those closest to him, the songs were bittersweet reminders of what could have been. A rapper with a future, a wife and children, and a dangerous secret, silenced forever by a single night of jealousy. When the gavel came down and Derek Coleman was sentenced to life in prison, the story officially ended for the courts. But outside the courtroom, the consequences were only beginning. For Alicia Hill, Marcus's widow, life was split into two halves, before the murder and after. Before, she had been the supportive wife of a rising rapper, believing her husband's late nights in the studio were for their family's future. After, she was a single mother, left to raise two children alone, carrying the unbearable knowledge that her husband's affair had cost him his life. Friends recall Alicia struggling in the months following the trial. Every reminder of Marcus, his clothes in the closet, his handwriting on scraps of paper, his music blasting from passing cars, was a knife to the heart. Yet she also couldn't erase the betrayal. One relative said, "She loved him, but she was angry too. He put himself in danger, and it destroyed everything." Her daughter, just old enough to understand that Daddy isn't coming back, would later ask why. It was a question no one could answer. For Tiana Roberts, the young woman at the center of the tragedy, life became a prison of a different kind. She was not charged with a crime, but her name became infamous in her community. Neighbors whispered, strangers pointed, and on social media, she was painted as the femme fatale who lured Marcus to his death. She moved away quietly within months of the trial, her Instagram account deleted. Her old friends saying they hadn't heard from her in years. To some, she was a victim, used by Derek, abandoned by Marcus, and blamed for everything. To others, she was complicit, even if only through recklessness. Either way, Tiana would forever live in the shadow of that night. Derek Coleman began his life sentence at a Florida state prison, another young man consumed by anger, unable to control his jealousy. To this day, he maintains his innocence, occasionally writing letters to family members claiming he was framed. But the evidence, the jury decided, was too strong, and whether or not Derek ever confesses, his life is now measured in decades behind concrete walls and razor wire. A man who once demanded control over his relationship lost control of everything. Ironically, Marcus's death gave his music more attention than he ever had while alive. After the murder made headlines, his songs gained thousands of streams online. Local fans held vigils, blasting his tracks at candlelight memorials. Murals appeared on walls in his neighborhood, his face painted with angel wings, microphones, and graffiti tags reading, "Gone but not forgotten." To his children, those songs are the only way they will ever hear their father's voice again. But for his wife, Alicia, the music is complicated. Every lyric about loyalty, about staying true, now rings hollow. In private moments, she admitted she couldn't listen without breaking down. True crime is often about mystery, who did it, how, and why. But this case was less mystery than tragedy, and it carried lessons that resonated far beyond one Florida neighborhood. It showed how quickly jealousy can turn lethal, how secrets, no matter how carefully kept, have a way of surfacing. And how one reckless choice can destroy not just one life, but many. Marcus thought he was living two lives, one as a devoted husband and father, another as a rising star who could indulge in temptation. But those two lives collided on a hot July night, and the result was fatal. In the end, no one truly won. Alicia lost her husband. Marcus's children lost their father. Tiana lost her innocence and her future. Derek lost his freedom. 4 young lives intertwined by desire, betrayal, and rage. 4 lives shattered. This case stands as a chilling reminder. Behind every crime story are real people, real families, and choices that cannot be undone. Florida has seen its share of violent crimes, but this one remains haunting because it feels so avoidable. If Marcus had stayed faithful, if Tiana had walked away from both men, if Derek had chosen self-control instead of vengeance, Marcus Hill might still be alive, raising his children, chasing his dream. Instead, his story ends in a driveway, under the glow of a street lamp, silenced by bullets. And that is the chilling reality of jealousy, betrayal, and murder. If you found this case as gripping as we did, make sure you subscribe to Criminal Minds Archives. Every week, we uncover real stories of crime, betrayal, and justice. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.